Rapture and Despair that I guess you've been exploring. And I'm going to play them in chronological order, so starting with Schumann. And I want to just explain a few words to sort of try to contextualize the piece and the factors that were at play for each composer, emotionally, psychologically, and musically speaking. So Schumann wrote his cello concerto in 1850 when he was 40 years old. He sketched it in 2 weeks, which is pretty darn fast, in case you're not aware of how long it can take to write a piece of a fully orchestrated symphonic work for cello. So needless to say, he was in a period of at least hypomania, if not full-blown mania. And it was an interesting time for him because he and Clara and the family had been living in Dresden, and Dresden had turned out very disastrously for Schumann, professionally and personally in many ways. So he was quite depressed towards the end of their stay there in Dresden. And they decided to relocate to another city where he had already had a position, an orchestral and choir teaching position available for him. So he was going towards something that was hopeful and promising and solid, secure, professionally, and away from some major baggage. So it was an optimistic time of transit and a time that generated in him a great deal of energy. What you might know from reading the biographies, whenever Schumann changed venues or moved his location, he became almost paralyzed with different kinds of anxiety. So that was also a force that was at play. He was apprehensive, he was anxious, unsure of himself. At the same time, there were these other positive things going on in his life. So in that framework, then, he suddenly got the idea to write a cello concerto, which came to him like this, more or less. So I'm going to play for you just the exposition, and just a word about romantic concertos. We're used to hearing, in say a Mozart piano concerto, a long introduction, the orchestra plays the theme, they present the second theme, there's some development, and on and on and on it goes, and the pianist is sitting at the keyboard waiting for an interminable amount of time, it seems, to come in. Finally, the whole introduction finishes, and we get the piano soloist. Not so in the romantic concertos. The idea of the romantics was it was cello against the orchestra. And these were battles, to be won and fought. So you'll find that the soloists come in right off the bat in romantic concertos, and that's true. We don't have the orchestra here to imagine this, but the cello is entering after literally one measure of just sort of a string pad. The strings just lay down just the chord, what the chord is of the composition, which is A minor, and then the cello enters.
Highly dramatic.
Very dramatic, very quirky, huge leaps. Schumann is using, you know, the full fingerboard, all 4 octaves of the cello, in a very short period of time. So quite radical, technically, actually, difficult. But he's also using non-chord tones. He's using, I guess, what jazz composers would call blue notes, or, you know, notes for emphasis that are not in the key signature, just sort of push the chromatic movement, the harmonic motion in ways that we don't expect. A lot of drama and then relief, explosion, you know, relief from that. So a great deal of variety of mood within a short period of time as well. So the romantic idea par excellence, really, in this little piece. The next piece I'll play is a bit of Tchaikovsky, because I should have said Schumann was born in 1810 and died in 1856. And then Tchaikovsky comes along, 1840, and he wrote one piece, sort of extended piece for cello and orchestra. He wrote a couple of little shorter pieces, but this is his only serious attempt to make a kind of concerto-like work for cello. And he wrote it in the most extraordinary circumstances. The year was 1876, so Tchaikovsky was 36, already quite successful. The year before, he'd written just a barrage of compositions. At the same time, he was not feeling well. He was struggling a lot with his hidden homosexuality and getting depressed because of that and some other reasons. Nevertheless, he was working very hard. In this particular year, January of 1836, he sketches his 3rd string quartet. He finishes his 3rd. 1876, excuse me. Well, he is 36 years old. 1876, January, he sketches his 3rd string quartet. It is finished by February and premiered in March in Moscow. Also very, very fast work. In April, he goes to a few sketches he had from the previous year, Swan Lake. From April to August, he finishes Swan Lake. An enormous task. In August, he goes to Bayreuth to hear the premiere of Wagner's Ring Cycle. He was present for that. Wagner wouldn't receive him for whatever reason, but he did write an extended review of the work, very, very flattering and favorable, for a Russian magazine. Sent that back. From September to November, he wrote the orchestral tone poem Francesca da Rimini, and then in December, Rococo Variations. So not a bad year. Now, you know, and a few biographers commented, but by this time he was a bit exhausted. Well, no kidding. But now the emotional backdrop to that was even more interesting. He had been spending some time that year in Paris with his brother Modeste, who was also homosexual. And Modeste was the tutor of a young boy who, in those days, we used to call them deaf mutes. But this boy, Claudio Conradi, had quite a bit of money. His parents had quite a bit of money, so they asked for Modeste, Tchaikovsky, to look after him, to teach him, and so on, and be his guardian. Now, it turns out that Modeste was seeming to have inappropriate feelings for the young boy, and when Tchaikovsky entered the triangle, Tchaikovsky himself began to feel maybe overly protective of the boy and to have some sexual attraction to him as well. And something snapped in him because he had been really, you know, caught between a very excessive homosexual lifestyle, though hidden, and guilt, terrible guilt, and sort of going back and forth about this for many, many years. When he saw this situation in his own family, it repulsed him. And he said, I draw the line. And so it was during that year that he decided the only way to fix his homosexuality was to get married. So he declares in September that he is going to wed, much to his brother's mortification. And their friends also were quite concerned about Tchaikovsky's decision. So that was the year that he made that decision. And then, and did I mention, in December, it was just the very month that he wrote the Rococo Variations, he begins his correspondence with his patroness, Madame von Meck, which was a 14-year, very intimate correspondence. It began that very month that he wrote this particular piece. So,
though they never met.
Ever.
They never ever met. That's right, in 14 years. So there was a lot going on. Now, just the last quick thing to say about this particular piece, it's really interesting. Here Tchaikovsky had just heard the ring cycle. He met Liszt and was looking at Liszt's music, and you know, Tchaikovsky's music is fat and thick and romantic as it can be. And it's almost, with all of this on his plate and all of this on his heart and mind, it's almost as though he said, I can't write another romantic piece. He turned to a different ethic, and he decided to explore variations, first of all, which is not a standard kind of format for the Romantics, but a style that was light and simple and neoclassical. And in fact, the exact style to which the Romantics had rebelled against. So it's very interesting. It's almost like he said, I need to let some air in my life. I need a little clarity. I need a little, you know, to organize my mind a bit. And so he turned to this style, which was not a style he was writing or interested in at the time at all, really, but it worked very well for him for this particular piece. So this is just the theme of there are 7 variations that follow. This is the theme. And what it requires from me is, you know, sort of distance, calm, you know, a different part of my physiognomy in my brain altogether. Then we have Elgar, and I'll play similarly the exposition to the Elgar cello concerto now, as I did with the Schumann. Elgar was very much changed by World War II. It depressed him deeply, it upset him. He was quite a pacifist.
World War I.
World War I.
Yeah.
If you weren't here, I'd be making all kinds of egregious errors. I got a fact checker here.
We'd never know, it's okay.
World War I, thank you.
I was just going to ask, do you have the dates for this composer?
For this piece?
For the composer,
Elgar. Elgar is 1857 to 1934. So it was that in 1918, just as the war ended, he wrote some sketches for cello concerto, and many scholars say that the cello concerto was his last great masterwork. There were a few others that came from that post-war period that are also extremely highly thought of, that happen to be chamber works. His piano sonata, his piano quartet, and his piano quintet. Beautiful, wonderful, just very fine works of a more mature composer. But the conditions under which he wrote this were interesting because, as I said, he was very moody, very misanthropic, very distant from his friends, very depressed, really, about the war and loss of life and loss of friends. And yet, on the scene was this beautiful young girl who was a sort of a friend of the family, an amateur musician, Mary Stuart Wortley, whom he had known for a couple of years, but was getting to know her better. She's an actress, very charming, very devoted to Elgar. And they enjoyed spending time together and talking and so on. And so he was in a state of, one biographer says, extreme agitation for this period of time, because he's he's really falling in love with this young woman. At the same time, his wife is there, and they've been married 40 years or something like that. So there's that tension, at the same time that excitement, and the other sort of malaise that's going on, you know, behind the curtain there with him. So there were a lot of different mixed factors at play when he wrote the piece. The following year, 1919, he finished the sketches, and believe it or not, it was recorded in 1919. Early gramophone recording, which I'm desperate to get my hands on. I haven't so far, but probably if I went to England, I could find it. So that was the first recording of the Elgar Quartet with the composer present, of course. So good. Magnificent passage.
We all know Elgar, but we don't know that we know Elgar. Because Elgar wrote the Coronation Suite, of which Pomp and Circumstance is the centerpiece.
Right.